In this video I'm gonna show you guys how I created this plane crash effect inside of Blender. And I've been trying to do something like this for quite some time, and I think I finally got it down to a method that I'm happy with and that I want to share with you guys. And if you've experimented with this yourself, you've probably noticed that the cell fracture option inside of Blender creates some super cool dynamics, but as soon as your object starts getting a bit more complex, it's not gonna kind of understand what you're trying to do, and you're not gonna have a good time trying to self-fracture an object like this airplane, for example. And I showed you an option in a previous video where you can kind of ignore those problems and fracture whatever mesh you want using the explode modifier, and that works great for sort of explosions and stuff where you don't really need those complex dynamics with the pieces sticking together and tumbling around and stuff like that. This method kind of uses the best of both worlds, so you get the complex dynamics from the self-fractured simulation and you get the visual complexity from the explode modifier. And I think some of you might find this useful. So let's get into it. So let's load in our objects that we want to fracture. I'm gonna use this airplane model that I got from Sketchfab. I can link this down below if you wanna try it with the same model. Right now it's kind of separated into different objects here, so I'm just gonna go ahead and select all of them, then hit Ctrl J to join them into one single object, like this. And also one thing with Sketchfab models, for some reason they always come parented to an empty object, so just hit Alt P, then select clear parent and keep transformation, and then hide this object that we actually want to keep. Select these root objects here and then hit X to delete. Alright, so now we've got our airplane here. Let's hit Shift D to duplicate this so we have two identical objects, and then we can just hide one of them. Now we want to go ahead and give this guy a remesh modifier, and as you can see that kind of creates this solid object here, and we're actually going to be able to self-fracture this one. So let's just hover over this modifier, hit Ctrl A to apply that, and then drop in a decimate modifier, 0.1 or something, just to get rid of some excess geometry here. Alright, so now we want to go ahead and self-fracture this guy. Let's add a particle system. Set the source to volume, so these points get distributed evenly throughout the mesh. Let's hit Object, Quick Effects, and Self-Fracture. And let's go for something like 250 pieces here. Hit OK to execute the fracture, and you're gonna see it calculating a little bit. So just hold on and wait for it to finish, and there we go. So now if we find this original object, and actually we can delete that, we can see that we have all of these perfectly fine pieces that are going to drive our simulation. Now when using this method, it's pretty useful to keep organized a little bit. So what we want to do is select all of these objects, hit M and hit New Collection, and we want to name this collection Sim for simulation, but you can name it whatever. Hit OK, and now you'll see that we have created this new collection up here with all of these pieces inside of them. And this is super useful to be able to select all of these objects at once, and it's gonna keep our scene decluttered and organized. Alright, let's select all of them, hit Object, Rigid Body, Add Active, and if we hit play we're gonna see them just fall like this. Let's actually add in a cube and just give that one a passive rigid body real quick, so we can see it kind of break apart, just like that. Now we want the pieces to be able to stick to each other and kind of give us those chunks that break apart and look amazing. So let's select all of them, go to Object once more, and Rigid Body, Connect. Then we want to open up this little menu that we got here and change the connection pattern to chain by distance. And just wait a little bit, and there we go. Now all these pieces are kind of linked together, and if we hit play we're gonna see some cool dynamics. Let's go ahead and select all of those constraints, hit M and move them to their own collection called Constraints. Now to allow them to break apart, we want to have them all selected, shift click one of them, then hold Alt and check breakable. If we want to change the settings for all of them at once, we can select them, shift click one of them, change whatever setting we want to change. So for example, the threshold, right click that and hit copy to selected. So now all of them break at 15. Let's hide both of these collections for now and start working on our detailed mesh here. So what we're gonna do is use the explode modifier to break this apart into lots of small pieces, but you can see that gives us this problem in some parts with these really long pieces that kind of look weird in the final simulation. And the reason for that is that our mesh is really unevenly distributed. So for example, this place is pretty good. This is gonna break apart pretty nicely, but yeah, this right here, for example, that's gonna be a problem because it really doesn't have any geometry to break it apart with. So basically what we want to do is chop this mesh up in a grid pattern so that our explode modifier has even geometry to work with. Let's just remove that for now and add in a plane. Let's scale that up to actually cover the entire object. Go into edit mode and just right click and hit subdivide until we have a good resolution. Sort of like this. Then what we want to do is select everything, hit X and delete only faces. So now we have this grid that we're gonna use to break this airplane apart. So select the airplane, go into edit mode, hit A to select everything, then control left click to select the grid, hit 7 on your numpad to view it from the top like this, then hit mesh, knife project. So let's wait for that to calculate. Then in this little menu that we got here, select cut through. And that might take a little bit, but once that's finished, we'll see that we have some added geometry in a evenly distributed grid like this. But our object looks exactly the same visually. Let's bring this plane back in, rotate it 90 degrees, then hit 3 on our numpad to view it from the side and do the exact same thing. So select everything, control right click the grid, go to mesh and then hit knife project. Then let's rotate it 90 degrees on the Z axis, go to front view and do the exact same thing. Alright, let's delete this grid and give this guy an explode modifier for real this time. So hit object, quick effects, quick explode. And right away you can see that the material kind of gets messed up a little bit. I don't really know why Blender does that, but just quickly fix it by setting the blend mode here to opaque and opaque, so that fixes that. Okay, so now you can see we don't have any of those super big pointy pieces here. There's still some jagged geometry here, but that's fine in my opinion. It's probably gonna make the end product look even better. So let's set the number to 1000, physics type to none. Oh, and before we apply this, let's just go ahead and select everything, hit mesh, clean up, merge by distance. You can do that before cutting into the mesh as well, but it doesn't really matter. And you'll see that we removed quite some unnecessary geometry here. Then let's go ahead and apply the explode modifier and remove the particle system. Go to edit mode, select everything, then hit P and separate by loose parts. Now we have all of these nicely distributed pieces like this, but the origin of these pieces is still at the center. So let's fix that by selecting everything, hit object, set origin and set origin to center of mass surface. Alright, so now we're ready to parent these to our simulation. So let's select everything once again, hit M and move them to a new collection called high detail pieces, maybe. Hit OK to lock that in. So now what we want to do is parent these objects to their closest cell-fractured part in this simulation collection, so that they will kind of get the animation from these pieces. And we could try to do that by hand, but that would be a pain. So let's use a simple script to get that done. And here you might be like, whoa, do I have to be a programmer to do this? No, we got ChatGPT. And I even fixed it for you. So you can just copy this script that I got from ChatGPT. I'll leave it in the description. So just copy that, head over to the scripting tab, hit new, then paste it, and here you want to make sure that you have all of the high detailed pieces selected and that your simulated pieces are in a collection called sim. And if you want it to parent to another collection, you can just type in that collection right here. Yeah, let's have all of them selected, then just hit run script and it will take a second or two. And now if we hit play, we'll see that they've successfully parented to the closest simulated piece. Now we can actually hide the simulated pieces and only view the detailed pieces. So if we add in a cube, for example, and give that a passive rigid body, we can see that we have some pretty sweet dynamics here. To get rid of all these lines here, we can go to this overlays dropdown and unselect relationship lines. Now it looks a little bit more clean. Alright, so basically that's the entire method, but I want to take this one step further. Right now it doesn't look that realistic because the airplane is completely empty, where we expect to see the interior structure of the airplane and maybe some engine parts here. So I'm going to show you how you can actually add those into the simulation. So to do that, I'm actually going to hide everything that we've done so far and import some new models that I got from Sketchfab and kind of grab the parts I need from those. So for example, this pile of metal scraps could be quite useful. So I'm just going to process that by hitting mesh, cleanup, merge by distance to remove some of that excess geometry. And then I'm going to decimate it to maybe 0.1. Then I found this other airplane model that I'm going to steal this interior from. Let's grab this debris that we found and kind of place it around the inside here a little bit. It really doesn't have to be perfect at all. All of this is going to be broken apart into small little pieces, but I just want to have something on the inside. So basically I'm just trying to make sure all of it's inside of the mesh. We can fix it even further in edit mode. And now when the pieces fall off, you can see that we have some kind of interior detail here. Okay, so we're gonna give this one a quick explode modifier. Let's go with 1,000 pieces here as well. Physics to none, and then apply it. Then go to edit mode, select everything, hit P and separate by loose parts. Move that to a new collection, call it interior detail. Hit OK, go to object, set origin, and set origin to center mass surface. Now we can just run this script one more time and it will parent it to our simulated pieces. So if we hide that collection now and play it, those start to move as well. Oh yeah, now we can see all that interior detail. That looks way better. And you can even see some in the wings. But then again, you could go crazy and add even more detail, but my scene is kind of starting to slow down here a little bit, so I'm probably gonna stop here. Alright, so now our setup is pretty much complete and we can start working on the actual simulation. I'm thinking I'm gonna do a plane crash where the plane kind of goes in for a landing and then crashes onto the surface. So to actually be able to animate these pieces, we want to add in an empty that we're going to parent them to. I'm just going to move it down here for now to make it easier to grab onto this later. And I'm going to select all of our simulated pieces, shift select this empty and hit Ctrl P and select parent to object but keep transform. Then we want to keyframe them to go from animated to dynamic when we want them to. Check the animated box and then add a keyframe there. Skip one frame ahead and keyframe it to not be animated. And if we hit Ctrl L, we can select link animation data. So now all of these will be keyframed to go from animated to dynamic. And if we move these keyframes on one of the pieces, all of the pieces are going to copy that animation. So basically, if we... Whoa, it crashed! No! No! It happens. What I was saying was, if we hit play, it's gonna simulate and stay in place until these keyframes happen. And now it's gonna become dynamic and fall to the ground. So if we give this empty, some location keyframes, it's gonna move down and then smash into the floor. Okay, I'm gonna move it way back here, hit I, give it a location and rotation keyframe. Then I'm gonna skip ahead a couple of frames. So right here it's gonna hit the ground. So that's where I put this keyframe. Alright, then I'm gonna give it another keyframe. Hover over this timeline here, hit T to set the interpolation to linear, so it has the same speed. Then I'm gonna move this keyframe until I'm happy with the speed. Alright, so that's a good speed for me. So I'm gonna see which frame I want it to get simulated on. So frame 50. Let's select one of these and bring this to frame 50, just like that. Now if we add in a plane, scale it way up, and give that a passive rigid body. I'm also gonna bring up the friction here. I'm actually gonna give this ground plane some displacement so it's not entirely flat. So I'm just adding some loop cuts in edit mode and subdividing it a bunch of times. Then I'm gonna give it a displacement modifier, hit new, clouds, texture, apply the scale here, set it to maybe 20, and then scale up the strength here. Then I'm gonna set the collision shape from convex hull to mesh to actually have it take the bumps into consideration when it's simulating it. So you kind of have to go through this process of running it, seeing if you like it, changing the variables a little bit, and just iterating until you get something that you're happy with. So what we want to do now is actually bake this simulation to keyframes. Before we do that, and this is super important, you want to make sure that you have all of these pieces selected, then go to Object, Relations, Make Single User, Object Animation. Otherwise, when we bake it to keyframes, all of the pieces are gonna get the exact same animation, which is gonna bring them all into one ball in the middle. So that's not what we want. Then go to Rigid Body, Bake to keyframes, and hit OK. Now let's go ahead and randomly select some of these pieces here. So I'm just using C to bring up that selection and just running it over the entire plane like this. Go to Object, Rigid Body, Add Active. And we can actually set the substeps per frame and solver iterations to maybe 2 to have it run quicker. So let's select one of them. Check animated, give it a keyframe, jump ahead 1 frame, keyframe it to not be animated. Then hit Ctrl L, select link animation data, and bring this forward to where the crash is happening. Go to Object, Relations, Make Single User, Object Animation. So now we can change their keyframes independently of one another. So let's just do like this to get some of them. Move those forward, do it again. Move those keyframes forward a little bit, and now we can see we start to get some randomization of where these pieces will break off. Let's play it and see what we get. I just really like how that brings another level of detail to the simulation, but if you wanted to, you could take it even further and add some more particles and smoke and whatever, but I'm pretty happy with it. So I'm just gonna hit bake here and render it out.